I talked about healing magic, protection magic, and even mind control magic. But let's talk about something simpler, water magic. After all, elemental magic is a staple of the fantasy genre, and my personal favorite. While I'm going to talk about this topic in GURPS terms, the concepts remain more or less the same across other systems. In GURPS, the College of Water Magic is definitely the largest one among its elemental peers. It contains spells that deal with water, steam, ice, cold, and acid. I can understand what ice is doing there, but why is acid sometimes mixed in with water in fantasy games? I have seen it in GURPS and Might and Magic. D&D is very indecisive. Some acid effects are related to water, and some are related to the element of earth. If you open GURPS Grimoire for the 3rd edition, you'll find a suggestion to split the college in 2 or even 3. The College of Water, the College of Ice, and the College of Acid. And that's what I do in my games. Sure, the College of Acid is small, but I still stand by my decision. Despite this division, the College of Water still remains quite substantial. So what can water magic even do? Why would anyone decide to become a water mage? From the in-game perspective, every spell must have a reason to exist. Somebody invented it for a specific reason. However, if you're a sorcerer or some other innate spellcaster, this doesn't have to be the case, as your powers are closer to superpowers. But I want to discuss it from the wizardly point of view, where spells are inventions. Turns out, water mages can be very important. Even in fantasy settings, settlements tend to be located near a source of drinking water, as it is required for survival and comfort. However, the existence of water magic would make it possible to settle somewhere where there isn't a lot of fresh water. First of all, we have the Create Water spell. In the vanilla magic system, creating a gallon of water costs 2 FP, and if you are using magic as powers, one level of Create Water provides 10 pounds of water. A gallon of water weighs 8.3 pounds, so I guess we can round it down to a gallon. By default, this also costs 2 FP, but in my games I made it cost 1 FP. A mage can spend about 48 FP per workday, which would allow him to create 24 gallons of water if each casting costs 2 FP, or 48 gallons if each casting costs 1 FP. A person requires half a gallon of water per day, or more in hot climates. Bathing and washing require at least 15 gallons per day. Let's consider a small town with 2,000 inhabitants, and say that each person requires 15.5 gallons per day. That's 31,000 gallons per day, or 257,300 pounds of water. In vanilla magic, this would require 645 water mages, or 322 water mages who know Create Water well enough to benefit from reduced casting cost. Alternatively, if each of the aforementioned skilled mages has 100 ceremonial assistants, then each one would be able to produce 4,800 gallons of water per day. Thus, only 7 mages would be enough, plus 700 assistants, which is almost half the population. What if you are using magic as powers? Let's say you have a specialized water-producing mage with Create Water 6. Such spell costs 30 points, which is affordable. Each casting would provide 360 pounds of water. That would require 715 water mages, again almost half the population. So yeah, living off of just created water would be basically impossible. But this spell still is useful on a personal level, especially when you are away from home. But there is a more efficient way: purifying water. In the vanilla magic system, this is merely twice as efficient, but when using magic as powers, it is much more efficient. For example, my Purify Water spell costs 1 point per level. Let's say that you have Purify Water 30 for 30 points. Each casting would be able to purify 9,000 pounds of water. Now, 29 water mages would be able to provide a town of 2,000 people with clean water. What if you have Purify Water 50? That's 25,000 pounds of water per casting. Now only 11 mages are required. If you have several specialized water mages whose job is purifying seawater, you actually can have a town survive on that alone. This opens up many coastlines and islands for settlement, and also creates a job that would probably be very well paid. Let's create a GURPS job for it. You can see it on the screen right now. Alternatively, almost every citizen could be taught Purify Water 3. A mage with even a low-level Purify Water spell would be invaluable on board of a ship. But that's only 2 spells of the College of Water. What about the rest? Seek Water would be invaluable not only to survive in the wilds, but also when finding groundwater, since it uses long-distance modifiers. A distance of a mile imposes merely a -3 penalty, so your perception should be more than enough to find a place for a well. When mining, a mage with Seek Water will be able to find aquifers and avoid drowning the entire mine. Thus, I can imagine dwarven miners employing at least one water seeker among their ranks. Seek Coastline, I believe, is only useful as a navigation tool. A ship captain sailing in the dark or in fog could make great use of this spell. Members of races who can only survive outside the water for a limited time, such as Sahuagins, also could find it useful when raiding the coastal villages, but to a much lesser degree. I talked about create water, but what about its opposite, destroy water? Honestly, aside from instantly drying clothes, I do not see a use for it. It actually could be useful in cold climates, when falling into icy water spells a quick death, even if you get out of the water. But yet again, that's just simply drying clothes. Shape water is difficult. By default, it includes ice and can be used to create ice sculptures, but I'm trying to talk about things only in the context of liquid water, as if the College of Ice did exist separately. The spell in GURPS magic suggests shaping water into a wall that can block ordinary fire, and I do not really know what else it can be used for. Even if you do need to create a water barrier, I doubt you carry around 20 gallons of water, so you'd only be able to do it near a river or a lake or some other body of water. To me, this seems to be way too situational to be ever useful. Umbrella is a nice spell on a personal level, but hardly a reason to specialize in the College of Water magic. Transforming yourself or others into water with something like Body of Water spell is a very powerful combat effect. It increases your mobility, allowing you to swim and flow through tiny passages, and makes you incredibly difficult to harm as you are diffuse, immune to metabolic hazards and pressure, do not have to breathe, and are slippery. The Body of Water meta trait costs a whopping 175 points. The spell has only 4 prerequisites and doesn't even require magery. Usually, when people are trying to point out just how cheap vanilla GURPS magic is, they point to something like Great Haste, but there are other examples, and Body of Water definitely is one. When using magic as powers, I don't think it is possible to make such a spell affordable in any normal game, unless you introduce a character point cost. Foul Water is basically a villain spell. In any body of water, this spell is pretty much useless, but you can poison wells with it. It can also be used as an attack spell against aquatic enemies, but you probably have better options for that, unless the enemy in question has so much DR that your attacks cannot penetrate it. Then it's better than nothing. Fog is an incredibly powerful spell. Even 1 yard completely blocks vision. Honestly, I think this is a bit too much. I would replace it with a penalty of -5 or -7. The fact that it also weakens fire attacks also is quite nice. However, this is strictly a combat spell. I have no idea how you'd be able to utilize it in a different manner. Resist Water could be useful in day-to-day life, as it makes everything waterproof. This is a good way to avoid rust. Walk on Water is a nice spell if you cannot or do not want to swim. Aside from enhancing mobility and letting you access places that would be otherwise inaccessible, one could imagine fantasy lifesavers working on a ship, saving those who got flung overboard by waves. Speaking of waves, there is also the Waves spell that changes the surface calmness. I can imagine a ship wizard learning this spell to make sailing smoother, but not much else. Still, any sailor would appreciate a mage with the Waves spell. The same goes for such spells as Current and Tide. Water Jet is one of the few offensive water spells. It doesn't actually deal damage, but it deals knockback, which can be very useful. I shall remind you that even a single yard of knockback forces a dexterity check to remain standing, and that if you knock somebody into a wall, you may deal blunt trauma damage, even through the heaviest of armors. Extinguishing fire is a nice bonus, and hitting the face for a short duration combat debuff also is nice. Overall, this is a good spell, unless you are looking for something deadly. In settings where combat spells get restricted legally, this one could be more widely available as a non-lethal option. The Mud Jet spell is pretty much the same thing. Water Vision is a weird spell. In vanilla magic, it lets you see through water, snow and ice, and has a minimum depth of 20 yards and a maximum depth of 200 yards. Now that would actually be useful, as water impedes vision quite significantly. When using magic as powers, it is very hard to obtain such huge penetration depth, so it becomes almost useless. Penetrating vision, even with the magical minus 10% and specific water minus 60%, costs 3 points per 6 inches. 20 yards would cost 360 points. Whirlpool is a complicated spell. I think the only application would be aquatic combat, otherwise there is no reason to learn this spell. Dehydrate is a very powerful attack spell. In vanilla GURPS magic it deals typeless damage, ignoring DR. In magic as powers it probably should be a fatigue attack with a dehydration enhancement. Fatigue damage is a very powerful tool, as even large monsters usually have human levels of FP. However, most fantasy settings feature many enemies that would be immune to this spell. Zombies, golems, non-water elementals, etc. Walk through water is a situational but extremely powerful spell. Moving and especially fighting underwater is heavily penalized, and this spell eliminates these penalties. Dry Spring, I don't know why one would ever use this spell, unless you want to be a jerk and deprive a community from a source of fresh water. Crake Spring, however, is a different thing. Since this is a permanent spell, this is a good way to improve a settlement's access to fresh water, if there is a pre-existing spring. However, GURPS Dungeon Fantasy makes this spell and Dry Spring exclusive to druids, so a normal wizard might not even have access to it. Earth to Water is a bit of a misleading name. By default it turns earth to mud, but for double the cost you can turn it to water. In combat it has an obvious application, as mud greatly reduces movement speed. In combat this is a battlefield control spell. Outside of combat it can be used to soften up earth or clay, or even find some drinking water in a pinch. Overall, a pretty good one. Essential water is the same as create water, but it creates 1 gallon of essential water per 3 FP. Essential water is 3 times as thirst quenching as ordinary water. Thus, for the purpose of creating drinking water, essential water is more efficient than create water, but washing and bathing does not get improved, so it's better to use normal water for that. Breathe water and breathe air enable land dwellers to explore the underwater realms and vice versa. In day-to-day life, it's not a very useful tool, but it can be a lifesaver in an adventuring situation. Swim, just like walk through water, is a situational but disgustingly powerful spell. If you ever have to fight in water, this spell will give you an edge. If not, then it's not really that useful. Rain is a spell that can cause or prevent rainfall. This spell would be a godsend for agricultural purposes. In addition to providing water to crops, it could be used to fill water cisterns at the same time. In certain areas, it could even be used to turn a battlefield into a difficult terrain, as rain can create mud. If cast in a cold climate, it can cover a large area in ice, which is a big deal. This skill would probably be learned by many NPC brewers and alchemists, as it greatly enhances the process. Boil water turns water to steam. This can hurt quite a lot. However, it still is quite situational. I guess it could also be used in bathhouses. I remember seeing someone try to calculate how you can power a steam engine with this spell, but I advise you not do that. Condensed steam does the opposite. I'm not sure when you would ever want to cast this spell, unless you're trapped in a room that is being filled with hot steam. Create steam can be a decent offensive spell, but otherwise I do not see much use for it. Geyser is a unique offensive spell that can be used both for battlefield control and damage. It is expensive, however. Steam Jet, that's probably the only proper offensive spell in the College of Water, if you remove acid and ice spells from it. It deals knockback and actual damage and can blind if it hits the face. Overall, I think this is an excellent spell if you really need a damaging spell. At last, you have spells that summon, create and control water elementals. The effectiveness of these spells greatly depends on the setting, as elementals may be very different. Generally speaking, however, summoning spells always are a great asset to have. In my games, I also give the elemental colleges plane shift spells that transport the caster to the elemental planes. And that's it. As you can see, water magic has a lot of utility and can be attractive both to adventuring mages and utilitarian NPC wizards who create water or tend to crops. The existence of water magic can give you some world building ideas. What if a settlement survives on desalinated seawater? What if every ship has a specialized water mage on board? How does magical rain change the crop production and battlefields? There is a lot to think about and I find it interesting. Anyway, thank you for watching, I will see you next time.